I'd like to get your attention, $600 billion. Do I have it? $600 billion US dollars in growth by 2017. That's what we're talking about in the Outlook. And that's what you're going to hear about today. So whatever your industry segment is and whatever you do in the business, it's probably worth getting up a little early to come and talk about that with us today. So welcome. I'm Deborah Bothan, and I have the pleasure of leading the PwC Entertainment, Media, and Communication Consulting practice here in the US. Thanks for starting your day with us. You are going to hear the themes, the numbers, interesting statistics, and a lot of points of view about what is driving the growth I just referenced. Sean DeWinter, one of my partners and a co-author of the Outlook for many years, is going to share themes and answer some questions. Like, are there any segments that will not have growth over the next 5 years? Think about what your own answer would be before you hear what he has to tell us. Will digital revenue in any of the categories grow faster and surpass traditional revenues in that category? Think about what your answer would be to that. And will the composition of the revenue change over the next 5 years? That's the kind of things you'll hear about. And then after Sean provides us with some of those fun statistics, Marcel Fenez, PwC's Global Entertainment and Media Leader, who, by the way, launched this 24 hours ago in Hong Kong. So he's all psyched up about being here in New York to do the same thing today. He's going to share some insights not only about the drivers of growth, but he's also got some interesting points of view around what are the roles of companies in this industry and how are they changing and evolving today and over the next few years. And I know based on my own conversations with many of you and the companies that you represent, that you are all spending a lot of time trying to figure out what are we going to be in 1 year, 2 years, 5 years. Are you going to be more or less into content? Are you going to be more or less into technology? Are you going to be more into data or more into data? Will you focus on countries that you really don't know anything about today? Will they be some of your primary targets in 2, 3, or 5 years? Will the top, the middle, or even the bottom of the consumer pyramid be the consumer that you're focused on? So Sean and Marcel's comments, of course, largely are based on the Outlook, the 5-year Outlook, which we launched today for the 14th time. And there's a few of us in the room that have been around for all 14 of those launches. Don't raise your hands, anyone. This year, similar to the last 13, we look at total consumer spending, total advertising spend. We look at 5 years of historical and 5 years of forecast. And we look across 50 countries. And that's actually up 2 countries this year. We added 2 countries, which kind of tells a bit about the story, because we added Nigeria and Kenya. And we added them because of the interest in those countries, but more because of the emerging middle class and because of the really incredible growth of the smartphone and of mobile access. After we hear from Marcel and Sean, then we'll have a keynote discussion with Carla Hendra, CEO of OgilvyRED and Vice Chair of Ogilvy and Mather. She'll be joined by entertainment media partner Mary Shelton Rose. You'll hear a lot of interesting things from them, including how they're focusing on the customer and what their point of view is around innovation and how innovation fits into and must fit into all of our organizations. And as we do every year, literally all year long, we talk to your customers. We talk to the customers between 18 and 59 years old, and this year in 10 countries. We ask them questions about their consumer preferences, about their buying patterns, about what's important to them, what they're concerned about. This year, as a result of all those conversations, two main themes came up. I will pay for content, but it has to be on my terms. And if it's not on my terms, I'm going to get it anyway. The second theme, I now know how valuable my data is. And you know what? I want some value for that. And I'm a little concerned about the safety of that data. So much of what you all discuss among yourselves and what we're going to discuss today is about the consumer and the direct connection with the consumer and how important that is to all of us to drive revenue growth. With that said, clearly the consumer is still uncertain if we will manage all that important, big, and I would suggest even more important, small data appropriately. Our speakers today will actually discuss some of those same topics that we discussed with those consumers around the world over the last several months. How do you leverage the prevalence of multitasking and second screens, and does this really drive advertising revenue? How do we respond to that consumer's ubiquitous desire for content across territories, real time? And is there real data in targeted advertising? Have we figured out the right model yet? How can we leverage shared experiences from recommendation to simultaneous viewing and sharing? So hopefully we'll get some of those answers this morning. And if not, one of the things that we do at PwC is, and many of you take advantage of that, is we have customized briefings on any of the topics or any of the countries that we'll talk about today. So if you leave here with an interest in that, please see one of the PwC teams members at your tables. Similar, if not exactly like most of you, PwC is a globally connected organization. And today, we have PwC teams and clients around the country and around the world watching this live stream discussion right now. I want in particular to do a shout out to Atlanta, because Atlanta has the largest team of clients and colleagues watching right now. And a good afternoon to all of our colleagues and clients around the world who are watching right now. Now, let's talk about the numbers. Literally hot off the press, I'd like to welcome Sean DeWinter onto the stage to give us all those great facts.
Thanks, Deborah. Please. Oh, yeah, thanks. Thanks, Deborah. Well, good day, particularly given the large international audience, or at least national audience that we seem to have today. So, and good morning to all of you here today. Glad to see a packed room. That's seeing some friendly faces as well. So my goal in the next 5 to 10 minutes is a tough one, and I would argue I might have got the toughest one of the day, is to take 6 months of work of pulling together the outlook and do a teaser of the data and actually encourage, hopefully, as Deborah mentioned, continued conversations. So forgive me if I go fast, and forgive me if I don't really explore the themes completely, but I'm somewhat purposely, because we'd love to have some individual conversations with you and your teams on the back of what we're talking about today. So with that, let's talk about the numbers. When we take the 50 countries that we looked at across the 13 segments for the total E&M spend, we got 2 insights that we wanted to pull together. And what we did is we took those countries and we plotted them on a graph for those who have above our average scale as far as market size, and above average forecasted cumulative annual growth rates, CAGRs, over the outlook period. And so one of the first insight that struck us was we can't forget the mature markets. And you see the examples here of Germany, Japan, UK, and the US as some of the mature markets, and there's a total of, I believe it's 11 countries in those mature markets. And what you see here is forecasted in 17 at a total E&M value of $1.4 trillion, and they're going to grow at 3.7%. The key factor here is they're going to underperform the E&M forecasted growth of 5.6% globally, but they are going to grow at a decent clip of 3.7%, and their scale alone is what you can't forget about and continue to invest in. The second key insight that we wanted to talk about is what we've characterized as the 8 countries that make up or 8 markets that make up the next wave, as we've coined it. And you see some familiar countries here on this quadrant here in the next wave, the BRIC countries, Argentina and Indonesia. And what's unique about these is, and it should be jumping out on the slides, is the 11.6% cumulative annual growth rate over these 5 years is pretty remarkable. Triples the mature countries and doubles what we see overall on a global basis. So important countries, need to focus on them, and we're going to start seeing them start moving over to this upper left quadrant as they become more mature and bigger in scale. The third quadrant in the bottom right here, the up-and-comers, these are great markets growing at 11.2% at a strong growth rate, but we categorize these in this quadrant primarily because their scale and their market size is markedly different than the upper half of the quadrant here. All that said, you can't lose sight of these markets as places to invest in the long term. It's just the opportunities for profit and growth are just a little longer in the future. So if I think about countries are going to migrate sort of on a counterclockwise basis across this quadrant, I would keep my eyes close on the up-and-comers and where those are relevant to your businesses. And then I'd say, rounding out the quadrant, we struggled as a group. What was the word we would use for the bottom left quadrant? And we tried to find a pretty reasonably appealing name, slow growth. That was a robust debate among the team on what we would call. I won't suggest some of the other names today. But again, so they're growing still at 3.1%. Positive growth for the most part. And probably not surprising to see some of the countries here that are looking at some troubled, financial crises as they struggle through that. But at the end of the day, 3.1% and $154 billion in market size, and surely we're going to see some surprises coming out of that group over the next 5 to 10 years. I would guess. So now that we've built this out completely, I think the 2 insights are sort of more apparent as it's completely built out. Don't forget the mature countries, and make sure you focus on the next wave, because those actually have some strike opportunities in this outlook horizon to actually see some profit. And I would suggest that if we're not focused on those areas, you could fall behind some of your competitors. Okay, so now let's take a look at the broader market, the segment analysis here. Here you see the analysis in red is the U.S. growth across the 13 segments. And in the gray shade, you see the global growth. There's not real big stories on the difference between the U.S. and the global. You do see, as I mentioned before, the 5.6% forecasted CAGR for global E&M growth, and that's contrasted to 4.8% in the U.S. Slower, and probably not surprising when you think back on the quadrant in our mature, in having the U.S. in the mature category. But they are growing at a faster clip than the rest of the mature market. Not surprisingly, one of the key takeaways here is the internet is driving the most high growth areas, both in advertising in the U.S. at 13.7%, and access. This is broadband and mobile subscription growth at 11%. Clearly driving digital growth, right? And then Deborah asked one of the questions that we wanted to explore today: where are those segments that we see limited or maybe even negative growth? And not surprisingly, we see that in the traditional publishing areas, whether it be newspapers, magazines, or books. Globally, they stay above the line and right around 0, but slightly positive. In the U.S., you see consumer magazines and newspapers continuing to struggle with how they're going to adapt to the new digital. What I think is interesting about the newspapers in particular is, while the growth is difficult, it actually is an industry that's done a fair amount of experimentation with business models, trying to figure it out. And I've seen some areas where they're not afraid to try to fail. I think that's a fact of their circumstances, that they have to actually be more agile and try to experiment. But I think that's something you're going to see. Is that's one of our messages to companies in the E&M industry, is to be more agile and try different things and see how it works. And I think there's been some good examples in newspapers, and they haven't found their sweet spot yet. So a complicated question is, what is driving the overall E&M growth? And when you get access to our book, you'll see we've got a premise that it's really internet access, and in the U.S., less about broadband internet access and much more about mobile internet access. And In fact, one of the interesting quotes I've seen recently is, or statistics I've seen recently is that 77% of internet searches are done with a mobile device in the presence of a fixed PC or a laptop. So people reach for their mobile device even before they go to their typical browser on their laptop. So I found that to be a particularly fascinating and a good example of how I think that's you're just going to see this mobile traction continue. And the other thing is, and it's very closely related to that, driving growth here is just the proliferation of mobile devices. You know, when I look around the room, I see people with 2 and 3 on their hands. They're personal, 1 for work, maybe a second for work. So just the proliferation of devices just gives that many more portals for mobile to continue to be important. So that's the report card this year as far as the segment analysis. The conversations that we want to continue with you are surround these 4 themes here. And these 4 boxes represent the key stakeholders in the E&M ecosystem: the consumer, the advertiser, the content creator, and the distributors. And we could spend a lot of time talking about this today, but this is what I really want to tease up and encourage more conversations with you. Here we see, you know, the consumer. They're actually pulling the data and the innovation. They're demanding more. You see this concept from the mass media to my media. Deborah mentioned it. We want it where we want it, when we want it, and on the device we want it. So consumers are pulling all that together. From a content creator perspective, they have to continue to stay relevant. They need to engage with the consumer more and find out what consumers are going to be willing to pay for and design for that. One of the more, from a content creator perspective, one of the more provocative statements you might want to think about is, should creators be designing for mobile devices first? Or even more provocatively, should it be mobile only? And I mean, it's not that far where you're going to see that I think the creative process being more driven, almost focused on mobile rather than what you see in a laptop or a desktop. Advertisers, the holy grail of more insights and more target-rich data to actually target these consumers is important. It's going to happen over time. We're seeing it already. But as I like Deborah's quote as well about the big, we hear a lot about big data, but it's the small data that really you have to analyze and figure out how to get to the bottom of, because it's the small data that's actually is how consumers are acting and how they're likely to act in the behavior. So that's important as well. And finally, from a distributor perspective, I spoke about it, agility and insight to the consumer is going to be really important, and trying to figure out how to deliver that content sort of ubiquitously across devices so that I can pick it up wherever I want. And that goes back to this whole concept of mass media to my media. That's 10 minutes or so of a lot of hard work and a lot of good thoughts, and we'd love to explore this more with you. So I'll step off the stage, but I would like to introduce Marcel to take off on our next part of the day.
Thank you. Well, I'm not Marcel, I'm Andrew EdgeCliffe-Johnson.
No, I was going to say you're not already.
I'm the media editor for the Financial Times, and having seen those slides about newspaper publishing, I'm very grateful to be still invited to do things like this. So we're sitting here in the Paley Centre, in the epicenter of the entertainment and media world. You could throw a stone and hit CBS, NBC, Time Inc., News Corp, even the FT block away. Is that game coming to an end when you look at that sort of international picture you've described of much faster growth from every other market almost, with the exception of a few ignoble Western European ones? The major growth is coming from a long way away.
Look, the major, Andrew, number one, I'm not sure whether we're throwing stones at all. But in terms of where the growth is coming from, I mean, the stats have been really saying the same thing for a while now. The question is, how aware, what are people doing about that growth opportunity? But I do want to pick up on something I think either Sean or Deborah said. You cannot ignore those mature markets. So, I'm an evangelist when it comes to talking about what happens around the world. So, you can get me going on that. But you cannot ignore the mature markets at this point. Why? Because a 1% change in a mature market, if you just work the numbers through in terms of total dollars, actually has a much bigger impact than maybe a 15% change in one of those up-and-comers, right? And so, and often that 1% can actually begin to fall down to the bottom line much quicker than building an infrastructure in a developing market.
That's a very comforting message, but if you
Okay.
carried that to its logical extreme, then you would never spend much time in Indonesia or the Philippines.
Well,
or,
as someone who spends a lot of
Argentina,
time
would you?
as someone who spends a lot of time in Indonesia and all of those markets, I think what I was trying to do there is just put it into context, right? Because I think to play one end of this story, one side of the story, only is wrong. So let's talk about the growth markets. I'm very happy to talk about the growth markets. You know, I think that one of the reasons why I like talking about those markets is because I think there's a great deal to learn as well. So there's this huge, you know, ultimately we are now globalized in terms of not just the world economy, but certainly in terms of media. And consumers are behaving remarkably the same around the world. And I think one of the things that, you know, as we start talking about the democratization of access, you know, the haves of 5 years ago were much fewer than they are now. Well, let me define
and more
the haves.
geographically concentrated.
Absolutely. So now the haves, and if I define the haves as those people, those consumers who have, you know, internet access, be it fixed or mobile, and have some sort of smart device, those are the haves. 5 years ago, 3 years ago, it was very concentrated and very small. You know, by 5 years' time, the haves, you know, there's an awful lot of them. And by the way, many of them are now middle class. You know, 2/3 of the world will be middle class by 2030. And middle class consumers, as they reach that stage, historically have been huge spenders on, you know, a lot of their initial discretionary spend goes on media and entertainment. In India, and going back to your sector, you know, at the moment there are whole swathes of the country who share newspapers. The first aspirational thing to do is to read a newspaper.
It's very heartening.
Right? That is the first thing. And the second thing is to read 3 newspapers. Right? So, you know, you can see these dynamics that are building around the world.
So I would guess that many of the people in this room, and certainly many of the people in the buildings around us, you know, are still heavily skewed to those mature markets. You know, it has been a very successful export model for media and entertainment from this country, but it has been an export model. It's mostly been you produce it here or in LA, and you plant your flag in other markets, but you're sort of shipping. Do you, as you look at the growth from those next wave countries and others, do you think it's going to be captured by the people in this neighborhood or by their domestic companies?
Yeah, so media traditionally has been local, right? It's either by regulation or just by language, right? Media is local. That's why we, you know, and actually I've heard it less recently, but obviously that term globalization, right? But I'm a big believer.
I would never get through the FT style guide for what it's worth, but yeah.
I could talk about re-glocal. That was my new one. Anyway,
Okay.
It's okay. No one's listening, Andrew. It's fine.
If anyone's a fan of Lucy Kellaway, I'm sending that one to her today. But okay, re-glocal. What is re-glocal?
It's the combination between regional and local, but I'll come back to it later. So he's
Learned something this
distracting.
morning already. Okay.
But I think if we go back to the premise that media and entertainment is largely a local experience, it's local language and their local dynamics. That's where it starts off. So I think that the challenge is always for what I would call the international media companies is how to appeal to that local audience. And increasingly, we're seeing a lot more co-production activity than we have seen before. And obviously, we're seeing a lot more M&A, partnering, that type of thing going on. Because the thing that we should also just consider at this point is the shifting of populations. So if you look at the Indian diaspora, the Chinese diaspora, right? And you look at how these populations are moving across the world, the Latino shift, that we also have to just take into account these dynamics when we're looking at who wins, who takes share of what. And of course, within all of that context, and it's something that maybe one talks a little bit less about here, but certainly I know is a huge issue, is the position of regulators. Because generally speaking, regulators regulate for yesterday and today, not for tomorrow. That's a sweeping statement, but certainly across the world, that is generally true. And what's happening is we have this huge pace of change, which is really difficult for regulators to react to in a fast enough way. And I think that's a huge frustration for media companies around here as they go into markets. Regulators often are there not necessarily to assist in that process. So consumers getting there, but the regulators aren't.
So even in the markets that are relatively open from a regulatory point of view, you're talking about this narrowing of the gap in access, between haves and have-nots.
Yeah.
And the sense I get is, there is suddenly this global market for content that was once local, and smartphones and other tablets and other connected devices enable that. But clearly the economics of these markets are radically different. To use your Indian newspaper analogy, you're not going to be spending, not many people are going to be spending hundreds of dollars a year on a subscription to the Financial Times. They'll be spending a few rupees a day to the local city or national paper. So do you see that sort of any sort of pricing, sort of evening out of the pricing around the world, or do media companies going to have to live with radically different pricing for those markets, even as the content becomes more similar?
Well, pricing is obviously a local issue and what the market can bear. But I think in general terms that where this becomes a lot more confusing is this combination of pricing and availability. Because as I go around the world, and I was actually interviewed by someone yesterday in Hong Kong, and this particular journalist had been amazingly frustrated. In fact, she was having a go at me, and it's not nothing to do with me. Because she was trying to find a certain show, right? A TV show, and she'd heard about it, and she wanted to go and find it, and she was willing to pay, right? A journalist willing to pay, sorry.
You can see Asian markets are different, okay.
And her frustration was she couldn't find it, right? Or when she eventually found what she wanted, and guess what? It wasn't available locally, legally, right? And she was willing to pay. I don't think she didn't finish the sentence, because obviously, but I think you can imagine the rest of that sentence.
So simply making your content available is part of the battle.
I honestly believe, as I go around the world, it is, and it's the most common complaint I get from consumers in whichever market, that it's great now having social networks, but social networks means we're all connected, right? So if you see something and you think it's pretty cool, you tell me and I can't see it.
So the sort of the old model was very much you'd launch Game of Thrones in the US or Mad Men or something, and then you would wait a decent few months, and then you get around to sort of bring it to London, and then if you're lucky, Australia would be 6 months down the track, and then it might eventually filter through to India a year or two later. But these sort of very carefully thought through windows for syndication and for other models. Piracy is what you're sort of implicitly touching on here, but is that windowing system for content just shattered now?
I'm not sure I would go as far as to say it's shattered. It's certainly, those windows are narrowing anyway, right? I mean, there's been a huge decrease in those windows. Those windows are still important. Rights are still important. But the problem is, we understand that if we're in the industry, because that's what we think.
But
the consumer doesn't get it. And so I think that what we are seeing is, because this consumer, us, has all this choice, the other thing we're actually becoming, I think, is pretty confused about what's out there. Because we'll hear something new virtually every day, and we are confused by the offerings that are available. So I think that, and there was a study done recently in Singapore around, and it was talking to consumers again around how they access TV content. And what came back was, we don't even know what's legal and what's not. So we go online, and I think that it really represents, I think, a challenge for how the industry communicates to its consumers, who hopefully they're gaining more direct access to, around where their content can actually be found legally. Because inevitably, if you don't know, there is a chance you'll find it somewhere else that's illegal. And what this study found, actually, which was quite interesting, is the consumers were paying for it, but they were paying for it off an illegal source, right? So, blur, right? There's got to be something there So when we were speaking a year ago, you pronounced in Churchillian fashion that it was the end of the digital beginning. Yes, I was right.
So, right. how long's the digital middle going to be, and when do we get to the digital end? So, more seriously than that, that sounded a very positive message. But one of the things I noticed in the study, so I was looking through the numbers, is that consumer spending on digital content, even by 2017, is going to be pretty small. It's below 20%, if I remember rightly. So now you're talking about this great growth in digital advertising, but when you actually look at the issue of consumers paying for your content and that sort of balanced model to dual revenue streams that everybody likes of consumer payment plus advertising, does that mean we're still at the digital dimes stage?
Look, I think, and there's huge, I think there's huge definition, first of all, around what is digital actually. We tend to classify it as anything that's delivered.
CD-ROMs, right?
I think it's probably electronic, actually. Yeah. But anyway, first of all, there is a sort of definition of what is digital. But I think getting to the heart of your question, have we gone from digital dimes into sort of digital dollars? I think we need to also think about, as an answer to that is, what are we really selling, right? What are we really... So I think consumers increasingly buy experiences and they buy engagement. The good news is what lies at the heart of that is really cool content. And everyone is wanting to be in the content game, right? Telcos are trying to produce content. Everyone's trying to produce content. So the good news is content is absolutely critical. But it's interesting because I think consumers are increasingly paying for something that is content plus, right? It's around the convenience, it's around the experience, it's around all the things that we're now beginning to build around this sort of the basic content to make it an enhanced experience. Now, what that will mean is the nature of revenues that the industry takes may well be more to do with share of revenue. It may well be, and this is something that we're seeing a lot, is we're seeing other people entering the value chain who have a different perspective, but can offer something on top of the basic content. And so I think we're seeing this huge growth in partnerships. We're seeing this huge growth in other revenue streams, right? So, live music is growing very significantly over the forecast period and has over the last 2 to 3 years. To me, music is music. The ironical thing is that you'll pay $150 to go and see Lady Gaga, but the same people who are going are not paying for music, right? So I think that maybe it shouldn't necessarily just be the sort of, the digital cent comment. It should really be about what are the products and services that we are engaged in and delivering to consumers.
Looking much more in the round at the
Yes.
definition of the business. So it seems to me that most of my conversations with people in media at the moment are, when the minute you get onto digital, you shift immediately to mobile. And the sort of, the biggest problem people are trying to get their heads around at the moment is monetizing this apparently hugely promising revolution in access that you're talking about. If you look at the mobile advertising question, social advertising, etc., people haven't cracked it. Do you think we're going to crack this over the period you're talking about?
Well, I'm looking over at Carla because I'm sure she's probably going to give us her point of view a little bit later, and therefore I'll have to be a bit careful what I say.
Audience participation is allowed, if you like.
But she's going to get her chance. So look, what we're actually looking at is still at mobile advertising. So the growth in mobile advertising that we're forecasting over the next 5 years is basically a 27% compound growth rate, right? So that's not shabby. And if we can...
Off a pretty low base.
Off a pretty low base. And I was actually going to say, if we went back 3 to 4 years, there was only about $2 billion worth of mobile, right? It is interesting because it's not just the access. I do believe that we've been talking about mobile as the killer. I mean, Deborah and I have had this conversation for years. She kept telling me it's mobile, and I said, but it isn't there. And she was right, and I was right. And what happened 3 years ago is we suddenly started getting the smart device, and that has unleashed this power of mobility. Because finally, as a consumer, I am wanting to interact with a mobile device in preference to a fixed device. Sean got it dead right when he said, whatever that statistic used, about 77% searches, that's correct. 3 years ago, I believe mobile, the best term for mobile was it was a distressed device. When I couldn't get access on a big screen or whatever, I went to my mobile because I was in distress. I was on the underground system, right? And I was distressed. Actually, that's a bad example because the signals didn't go there in those days. But if I was in Hong Kong, I was on, their signals did. And when I couldn't do anything else, I went to my mobile because I was in distress. That's completely shifted now. It's the device of choice. And it's that, I think, has really opened up the opportunity for mobile. And so we will see strong growth in mobile revenues. I don't believe yet that we have fully understood the potential. And I think we have a lot to learn. Therefore, we do have to look around the world at how mobile is being used. Mobile in Africa, for example, has been used as a payment device for years, right? And I think, so that's why I think there's an awful lot that we have to learn, we have to experiment with as well.
I mean, it's had this very functional, very beneficial role, if you're a Kenyan farmer, for example, but can it make, is a Kenyan farmer also using it as an entertainment device? Is it making
Well, I tell you
that
what
job?
he will start to do. He'll start using it as a payment method for entertainment content, right? A Kenyan farmer perhaps hasn't had the, that's not necessarily been his or her priority. It was probably just playing for grain, right? But the good thing is he has the payment device. So he or she has that payment device. And I think that is, we have to understand that consumers who come from, who are not encumbered by all the stuff that we in this room are, right? You and I are encumbered by our past, by our history. And I think the coolest thing is understanding the behaviors of people who come to this new. So those haves that are having it for the first time don't have that legacy. And that's why I think we need to look at those markets to understand, A, the behavior, and B, the potential for monetization.
So it's very tempting at these things to just think about the growth and the sort of the future. But all of these, all of the established players in these industries have enormous legacy businesses. Is it clear? Is there a sort of common thread running through the strategies they should be deploying for managing the legacy business? I mean, for example, anytime I sit down with a newspaper publisher or a magazine publisher, we can spend 100% of the time talking about digital without anybody bothering to ask, what's your print strategy? Is this the moment that people should be asking that question?
Well, I hope what's happening is people are asking, well, how will consumers interact with my content, and how will they pay for that content, right? And print, hard copy probably forms a part of that. I would say that and when we talk about legacy businesses and we talk about the approach, one is it's around insight, customer insight. The second, it's around agility and innovation. There's a huge amount of innovation that we have seen. Unfortunately, sometimes it's not either communicated in the right way to consumers such that it's not really fully appreciated. But I think the three watchwords for me is insight, agility, and innovation. And that needs to permeate through all of our organizations. And it also needs to, I think, embedded in that, unfortunately, is change. Designing content with a different mindset. Designing it for a consumer who is mobile or digital, right? Sean alluded to it. Designing the way that we structure our organizations with that in mind. And of course, that involves people. It involves how people are paid, whether they're paid at all, right? And these become very, very difficult issues. These are not simple things, but I do believe that that's why when we see a company coming new, they're always able to crack it quicker.
I was once told the only thing that likes change is a wet baby. And you don't have many of those in most workplaces. But do you think though, now if we're past the end of the digital beginning, do you think that these companies have actually made the structural and cultural shifts that you're saying are necessary to become more agile, or how do you think they're going to get there?
It's a journey, right? We're on a journey. Some people are moving quicker than others. I think what's happening though is that disruption is really cool. I think there's nothing wrong with disruption, and I think it's how people react to that. It is a journey. There is obviously still a concern about, how do I protect a legacy? I think it's more how do you monetize that legacy in a different way. I think that we are seeing huge change, but I think that the issue is over the speed of change, but I am actually quite encouraged by the fact that in the last 18 months to 2 years, that pace of response has become much bigger. And that is because you've had players coming in there that are disrupting, and there's this oh my God moment, and oh my God is good for change, right?
Now, I'm going to open up for questions in just a minute, so please think of them and stick your hand up in a moment. Just sort of last question from me.
Yeah.
You talked about this rush for content. Talk to those movers across the street. He'll tell you he can sell hundreds of millions of dollars worth of I Love Lucy episodes. Seinfeld has racked up billions already. Netflix is writing very big checks, Hulu Plus, etc. It's a wonderful time to be running some of these companies. But you're also saying there is this explosion of content creation, be it from new large digital players or from user-generating content and all the stuff we know. So all content is not created equal here. What's actually going to be valuable in 5 years' time?
Well, I think it's number one is it's content that is delivered with this consumer in mind who is using and engaging with it, right? So we've seen the impact, for example, we talk a lot about companion second screens when it comes to, TV content. Yeah, for sure, right? Design of companion content. So I think the first thing is it's not necessarily the type of content, but it's the way that content is envisaged to meet that audience, okay? There is no question that kick-ass content like sport, right, is really hugely important, hugely valuable, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. And I think on other types of content, it's really around is it made for me? And one of the things that we talk about in this year's Outlook is the sort of move from mass media to my media. As a consequence of that, I think we're going to be talking a lot also about curation of communities and the roles that content companies and others have in curating those communities. Because as new things are introduced, go back to my point around that journalist who couldn't find what she was looking for, right? Now, there was an opportunity, actually, there is an opportunity there for her to be pulled in, such that when something is, released, whatever the right word is, she knows where it is, right? And so I think that we need to also think not just about content creation, content aggregation, all those good things, but we need to talk about the curation of communities, because that will enable us to deal with this shift from mass media to my media, from one to many, to one, many to many. It has to involve that curation of that community. And what better way of doing it than around cool content?
All right. Now, we've got some microphones, I think. So who has a question for Marcel? This is like a British audience. Okay, right.
That's because of us, man.
I count
due
on
respect,
New Yorkers to be more forthcoming. Could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm James Orsini, CEO of Single Touch. You mentioned that you and Deborah had a debate 3 years ago and saw the mobile moving from a distressed device to a device of choice. And Sean went so far as to say creative agencies should possibly consider creating for mobile first. So where do you see this mobile now by 2017? If we looked in the rearview mirror over the last 3 years, and we're hearing some bold statements, where do you see this device by the end of this term?
So first of all, this device that we talk about, whether it's the first generation or whatever release of this device it is, this device, by which we mean a smart device, will be in many more hands than it is today. So that's a fact. And it doesn't really matter if it isn't the latest one, because even the basic functionality will enable a consumer to do what, right? I now agree with Deborah, right? I didn't agree with her 3 years ago because I didn't see it, because we didn't have the device. I'm with her now, and I think the shift, it is inevitable, but it doesn't, by the way, mean that, for example, the viewing experience. I think it's interesting, we had this shift, when Andrew and I grew up, right?
Not in the same house or
Right.
at the same time.
You know,
necessarily.
we watched TV with our parents. It was kind of like that social experience. And then we
Jimmy
all got,
Savile, mostly.
you as well.
No.
Damn. So that's probably true. So it went from this sort of the social experience of a family, and then everyone went and had their own things in their own rooms, right? But I do believe that we're beginning to watch content more collectively, if not in the same room, right? And what is enabling that, I think, is the mobility fact. You know, is the fact that you don't have to be in one place to be able to network and to enjoy a social experience. It's because of that that I think it's a real game changer. I also believe, and we have the statistics in the book to show it, which basically, you know, because there are a large number of people who will never have ever experienced being tethered, right? I mean, look how stupid those, you know, why was a telephone ever attached to the wall, for God's sake, right? And I mean, out there today, I mean, a lot of people who just can't get that. But why is the TV tethered to a wall? Why is, you know, so I think that the reason why it becomes so compelling is because there will be people who never connect to a wall, who never connect to a physical building other than to charge the battery. And maybe the biggest problem with mobility right now is over battery life. And I know there was a girl that's come out with like a supercharging battery, but maybe the biggest problem is battery life, because everything else is really getting there.
Over here. Do you have the microphone? We'll go on to you.
I'll shout.
All right.
Duncan Edwards from Hers. Just curious if you could expand a little bit on your comments about the role of regulators and as you see it in the future. Just interested in where you see the issues there, whether you see it's about sort of antitrust issues, preventing consolidation, privacy issues, or ownership rights for foreign companies. I mean, where do you see this whole kind of framework heading?
Okay, well, all those issues, I mean, I would think certainly all of those issues are the issues, and there are some more as well, particularly around censorship, dare I say it. Where do I see it heading? I mean, certainly I would say that regulators are beginning to understand, or at least, yes, beginning to understand the issue of a level playing field. I mean, that I think is a key aspect of what many people are talking about. They are distracted at the moment by the privacy one, right, which is taking on a huge life of its own. And by the way, the consumers that we talk to are talking about it a lot, so you can understand why the regulators are interested in that. You know, that needs to be dealt with. The degree to which regulators are learning from each other is increasing, but unfortunately with media, I'm going to make maybe a controversial statement, is that media owners in many parts of the world you know, own other things other than media, right? They're very, very influential in their own marketplaces, right? And so inevitably it's not as simple as just saying blame the regulator, right? Because the regulator's job is to regulate. This is to do with policy, it's to do with influence, and and that is why it's a lot more complicated than just saying regulators talking to each other, because they do that actually quite well. But their job is I think, made more complicated because this is a policy issue, this is a political issue, and if you look at the interests in media in many countries, you know, it's not just about media, it's about other things as well. So I'm not sure, I didn't answer that question well, but hopefully I just gave some indication as to why I think it is difficult. We shouldn't blame the regulators necessarily because they are communicating, but it's a bigger issue.
Okay, we've got a question in the middle of the room.
Nariseki with News Corp. Two related questions on data.
Yes.
Deborah mentioned that audiences or consumers are asking questions about how their data is being increasingly used. Is there anything in this study that gives you a sense of what is it they're willing to exchange their data for? Do they want to get services? Do they want to get paid? I mean, what would it take for a consumer to say, okay, you can use my data? Is that awareness at that level? And as a lot of publishers are realizing the value of their audience data and are starting to kind of say, particularly News Corp, starting to say that our data itself is valuable in addition to your ability to reach our audience. Are you noticing a willingness on part of advertisers or big brands to pay a premium not just for advertising, but also for the data that comes with that. Because currently they just get it for free.
Okay, right. Danger with two questions is, yeah, okay. So I'll answer the first one first, and you might have to repeat the second one when I get to it, right? Okay, what are consumers willing to part? Okay, one, they know their data is powerful now, right? So they realize they have a bit of power. Who owns their data? Them, until they give it to someone else. So who are they gonna give it to and what for? Consumers are mercenary, right? They want something in return, and that is either access to, let's dissect it, content, right? Content to them is really valuable, right? So if they give an information to a content provider, what do they want in exchange? Free content, right? Maybe not free content forever, but at least they want, 20 hours of something, right? Or whatever. So that actually also indicates, because they are willing to give their information to content companies, that they truly value content, which I think is a really important point. The second thing that they expect, and in some markets more than others, is obviously the discount vouchers, that type of the coupons or whatever. But that's nothing new. I mean, I've been filling out surveys in newspapers for years in return for a $1 donation to a charity, right? So it's not that this is new, but there is that return. And the third thing I think is just about, if I give you my data, you are going to give me something that is much more tailored to me, right? And is going to get rid of some of the clutter in my life, right? So if I give you my vital statistics, I'm a clothing company, I expect you to give me clothes that fit, right? Not give me, so I'm looking for an enhanced experience. So content, yes. Cash equivalents, yes. But also a better tailored experience in terms of how you deliver it to me. Get rid of the content, to get rid of the clutter in my life, and you've done me a favor. I'll give you my data. Obviously, if you betray that, that's a trust issue. If you betray that trust, I will not come back to you again. And that is where I think the flip side of all of this is data protection is really critical. But data protection isn't just physical, it's how you use it on an ongoing basis, which then tends to go to the second question, which of course now I've forgotten.
Will advertisers pay for that data? Will they pay the media owners for that data?
So I think advertisers, and again, Carla can probably comment later, but I think advertisers are realizing that they need to access consumers in a completely different way. And therefore, if this working together, I mean, we talk a lot more about solutions, branded content, and all that good stuff. I believe that there is a premium that will be paid for that, because the content owner is much more able to deliver the consumer that the advertiser wants. The content that lies at the heart of that will still be a sort of function of good creative processes, but it's the fact that we know who these people are now, and we know what they really want. So I think that there is a premium for that. But I also think that it'll be, it's not just about space, right? We all know it's not just about selling space anymore. So I believe the answer is yes, but maybe that's a question that you can pick up in your panel.
Okay, do we have another question? We do.
Oh, wow, there's a microphone. My name's Colleen Fahey-Rush, and I'm from Viacom. A lot of people say, including me, that if you can't measure it, you can't monetize it.
Yeah.
And I think that I'd love to hear your point of view on the state of measurement today and how that could be a speed bump for some of your projections, or how we can resolve the limitations of some of the measurement, particularly here in the U.S.
What are the biggest limitations?
Yeah, well, we do talk about that in our insight piece, because it is a critical limitation. That's a critical issue that needs to be addressed. I mean, advertisers are, in my opinion, increasingly platform agnostic, which means that if we don't get that information, we're, I was going to say something in the wind, but I can't say that word. So I think it is I mean, number one is we recognize it, everyone recognizes it, which means that, and I do believe we've made quite a lot of progress in the last year, 18 months. I mean, PwC has been very active particularly in terms of on the print side, at trying to get cross-platform measurements around print. I think that around the world, probably it's even more shaky than it is here in the US. I think this is one of the areas where the US and the UK are definitely leading. And it's requiring a degree of collaboration we've never seen before. I think one of the problems is there's always this element of competition, which means no one is coming together to really discuss the issue. I think everyone in this room knows it's one of the hugest issues that we face, and that therefore there is unprecedented willingness to crack it. It's not cracked yet. Will it affect our data? I would say that actually in terms of our outlook, we haven't anticipated a huge change in that. And if there is, then arguably the projections would probably be more aggressive. So we acknowledge it, everyone in this room acknowledges it, there is progress. And again, maybe Carla, you'll also comment on it.
All right. Well, we have 5 minutes for everybody to reload with coffee, so I am going to cut off there. But thank you for your questions, and thank you, Marcel.
Thank you, Andrew.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Matthew Belloni. I am the executive editor of The Hollywood Reporter, which I believe is here and being distributed if you'd like to check it out. Okay. I am going to be moderating the second panel this morning. We have Carla Hendra, who is CEO of OgilvyRED, which is the global strategic consulting arm of Ogilvy. And we have Mary Shelton Rose, who is with PwC. So we'll sit down. Thanks. All right, so that was fascinating, that first panel. A lot of stuff to talk about. One thing that we talked about towards the end was this notion of the measurement problem. And I wanted to start that off with Carla and sort of get your thoughts on this issue of a lot of people out there watching more content than ever, and the challenges in finding them and measuring what they're actually doing versus what traditional measurement says they might be doing.
So I think I might have a little bit of a different point of view about this whole challenge, because I grew up in database marketing. So it's been around for many, many, many years. Lots of data, lots of technology. And I actually believe that because of mass marketing, no one's really had that much of a motivation to really understand how to apply data technologies and to get to know their customers better and to be of more value. And if you're a direct marketer, you have to do that because you live and die by the long tail. But you know, in my experience, only about 5% of the actual data and the capabilities are being applied today. So we could solve a lot of these problems much quicker than we've wanted to so far. But I think what Marcel pointed out is there's now, even in the last year alone, much more recognition that we better do it, because if we don't, consumers are just going to solve it for themselves. And your content will either be ignored if it's not served in a more interesting and you know, relevant way. That's one of the key areas of value exchange, is what's relevant to me as an individual. So I think, you know, we work really closely with IBM and with Axiom and with hundreds of startup technology companies. There's more technology out there than anybody knows what to do with. You just have to be able to integrate it. We've created some cross-platform capabilities, whether it's a WPP platform or Group M or whatever. There's a lot of stuff out there, but I think it's training clients and advertisers and marketers to think different. I mean, they have to stop, you know, doing things in the way that the legacy, you know, has made all the money, and really begin to use some discipline. So I think it's getting over that. How do you have the discipline to go after changing your organization, hiring the right kinds of talent, and really applying what's available?
You know, one example in a recent interview that Ted Sarandos of Netflix did with Hollywood Reporter, yeah, he was talking about the different algorithms that they use in targeting specific Netflix users with different content. Hulu does this with ads. If you watch a certain type of programming, you might get a certain type of ad. So, I mean, how far away is this from this kind of model from being adopted by traditional television providers or other non-digital only outlets?
Well, again, I mean, I don't think anybody's going to be able to, for very much longer, distinguish between traditional and digital. All the media is digitalized now. So whether we define it as what's delivered over IP or what's not, that's not how the consumer defines it. So I believe there is going to be a lot more of that. What really Hulu and Netflix have laid the groundwork for, what they've shown other kinds of media companies the ability to do, you know, people can copy that pretty quickly. You just have to get out and do it.
And I think what I'd add to that is, you know, in order to really take advantage of that behavior, you've got to be able to measure it, which is what we heard earlier. So there are cross-platform measurements evolving, but they aren't really a used currency yet. They're there. We're starting to see advertising dollars spent on them. But as you look to monetize that behavior, you know, you need to have a currency that people buy in and trust. So we know, for example, there's a multiplier effect. If you see an ad on two different platforms, there's a multiplier effect on the brand recognition associated with that. But I think to really optimize this, we're going to have to move forward and accept those cross-platform measurements and that online-offline activity and be able to monetize that appropriately.
And that's a sort of case-by-case basis. I mean, there's a company called Market Share Partners that's based in Los Angeles, but global. They work entirely on algorithms and modeling of media mix, and they have to be able to look at those effects, that multiplier effect. Now, we've done it for many years, kind of building up the individual media spends and results individually. Now we have to be able to do it dynamically, and sort of, you know, that's where, you know, just applying regression analysis and that sort of thing will help us do it. But we've got to get the cases out to the marketers and prove it. And once they see that demonstration, I think people will move in that direction.
So what is a good case study? What is a company that's doing this right? What is a brand that's doing content right?
Well, shall I go?
Go ahead.
I mean, I'd like to give the example of DuPont, who's one of our clients, because they really made, with their new CEO a few years ago, Ellen Kuhlman, they made a very conscious decision that they were going to take their marketing spend globally and distribute it very differently from the traditional method. So they can't, and that didn't mean they were going to completely ignore paid media, but they wanted to really be able to look at a model that was paid, earned, and owned. And that, for 4 years ago, when we started this program with them, that was quite unusual. Now we see more and more clients moving into that content-rich approach. So with DuPont, they were changing their brand to stand for 3 things: food, protection, or security, and energy. That's what, so, you know, DuPont has a customer that's everybody from me buying a Corian countertop to a food, you know, gigantic food manufacturing and farming company to everybody in between. So to simplify, those were their 3 platforms. We put together, instead of making television commercials and distributing on, you know, the typical channels, we put together with BBC World News a program of now 40 individual original content videos that we created an ecosystem of distribution. So through BBC, we can get 360 million viewers worldwide, you know, out through that channel. But we also used all of DuPont's owned channels, digital distribution, whether it was their websites or mobile or events, you know, to also distribute. And these stories were about, you know, the policemen that they're working with to create incredible new security systems, the farmers that they're doing food science with in emerging markets. And so they're big emotional stories, and all told from the point of view of that person, not from the corporate point of view of we're DuPont, we're doing this. It was all about, you know, how the world is becoming better, and it resonates incredibly. So we now have, and therefore have earned a huge amount of additional media impressions. So through all the social media, through the employee base. So I think they really were, you know, going out and doing something brave and different 3-4 years ago, and we've now just expanded it further and further.
But those kinds of experiments, I mean, I think people who are in traditional media might hear that and say, well, that's scary. That's someone going around our traditional system. And how do you, I mean, is that something that you see more of, or is it something that, you know, what is a traditional media owner to do when they hear about strategies like that?
Well, I think embrace and, you know, move that direction is probably a good idea, because you can't just sit there and hope that the legacy will continue. And I think many media companies are doing exactly that. media companies have had digital and other mobile divisions for a long time. I mean, we've been doing experiments for a long time. I think what we're seeing is we're getting to critical mass now, and there have to be new kinds of solutions. So, I think there's no point in being fearful. It's where the consumer and the customer is going, so get there. And I do think that it's not about eliminating past channels or methods of communicating. It's both and. It's not either or. And if we don't look at that, I mean, you see device proliferation. You see the media habits changing. Continuous partial attention is one of my favorite old terms I heard 10 years ago that I thought was the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. Except if you try and have dinner with anybody under 20, and I have 3 of them in my house, it's not a fun experience because there is really continuous partial attention permanently, except when they want money. But I get on my mobile device 40 requests a day from those guys. Anyway, so I think I just think it's all moving that way. We should just get on the boat.
Yeah, I'd add to that is as you look at the trends and what's happening with television content and viewing and consumption, it's growing, right? And so all of these second screen or alternative screens, because it's more than 2 usually, all of these opportunities just provide more opportunity for content to be consumed in places that are more and more targeted. So to your point, I think it's more, and there's more room and more opportunity for that consumption, and much more opportunity to more deeply understand the customer to target where you want to generate that consumption from.
And the other issue is going to be the monetization for the content providers and creators. So as an agency service, we're in the content creation business, and we've been paid that way for a long time. I was with a client last week at a board of directors meeting where they were thrilled to announce that they crowdsourced through Pop Tent, which is a company we've used for video production for years, through a curated set of directors, a TV spot, which they did for Mother's Day, and it cost them $10,000. Well, one of their actual ad agency is one of the WPP companies. They weren't too thrilled about that, I bet. So what are they going to do? Pretend it doesn't exist? No, they can't do that. So that we are using the creation of original content at much lower cost means. We're using crowdsourcing ourselves. We have to just change the way we do business too. And
yeah, I was having a conversation with a TV agent about a month ago around the upfronts, and I asked how the upfront was going, and he said, you know what? There are now 46 buyers for original serialized television content. There has never been anywhere near that amount. So the question then becomes not just making the content, it's how to get it noticed, how to get it out there, how to get paid on it. And I think the question then becomes, in this saturated media environment, what are the real curators? What are the ways that as a professional content creator, or even as a brand looking to get eyeballs on a potential viral video or something like that, what are the real curators?
Sure. I mean, I think they're evolving, right? There are a number of curators, and I think as you look at the different options of where people can get content and start to build communities around the content is where you see the evidence of that curation. So we talk a lot about social media. The capability of social media to build a community and to deeply engage with content and to help in that curation process. But I think curators are absolutely developing. I mean, we will continue to have the traditional models and the players that have been in place, and all of our research is showing us that. But we are seeing additional curators develop in the market, and social is playing a big part of that.
So I think there's probably a couple levels of curation. On one level, I'm the most important curator of my content because I personally have the ability, because of mobility and technology, to do that. But I have a limited amount of time. So we were talking about what people value. They value utility, they value entertainment, they value information. Those are the 3 things that any curator can deliver. And so there are some categories. So there are news curators, there are news aggregators. You can go onto newser.com and get a really fast view of what's going on in the world. And you might not want to at the same time, or you might want to do that, and then later when you have more time, you're going to go to the NewYorkTimes.com. It's, again, not an either or, but I think that kind of vertical curation can be done. And then I think there are communities, which are so social movements and all of the shifts that are happening where self-identified communities are coming together, they can perform a curation function too, because most of them have a digital presence. Most of them can deliver opinions about content. So I think there's multiple levels of curation that we'll see.
One interesting thing that jumped out at me from the report is that as much attention as over-the-top services are getting, the prediction is by 2017 it'll just be 6% of the market, and pay TV is still going to dominate. It gets to that question that Marcel was talking about protecting the legacy business. I mean, is that, when the lion's share of revenue is still going to be driven by this legacy business, how much is the investment justified in this area?
Well, it comes down to who's going to pay for the innovation. I mean, we see margins being, really pressured on the content and the media companies. We see it in service agencies like us. There's a limited amount of investment if you can't see what the payoff is going to be. And I think we're going to battle that over the next few years. But at the same time, I think the report says very well, if you're not doing continuous innovation, you could just put yourself out of business. So you have to, you just have to do it. So.
Yeah, sure. I think the reason why you see the traditional model still having so much of the revenue as you get out is because they have compelling content. Yeah. And they have compelling content in one place. And particularly when you think about live events, sports, which I think Marcel mentioned before, very compelling, and people are going to go back to that. And the studies will show you too, as you look at the different demographics in the population, younger people have more time and less money, so they can go search for it. As you get older, they have less time and more money. So that bundled solution and that one place to go for your content is very attractive. And so as you look at that trend and why, there are very good reasons why it will be what it is, because all that content exists in one place and it's easy to get to. So until there's a point that you can see the ROI on that innovation, we see some interesting tests, right, in the marketplace.
Netflix is a perfect
Absolutely.
test.
You see,
I mean, they're spending millions on original content. They've got a lot of attention. Their subscribers are way up. But a lot of people think they're overspending, that this cannot be sustainable. What do you guys think about that?
I mean, I don't know if the same level that they're doing right now is sustainable, but I think the thing we have to remember, and Marcel talked about the mature markets, a tiny shift in a mature market is a big deal. So there's $165 billion of media spend projected for 2013. What are the alternatives for a marketer if they don't go through what we call the traditional channels largely? I once knew a self-made billionaire who said, you'd be surprised how hard it is to spend $1 billion. That's his personal money. So just,
can you give my number?
We'd like to try that. I think we could help him with that. There you go.
But when you look at the major marketers globally, they're still having to put through most of their spend into, again, what we call traditional channels. What I think is going to happen is traditional is going to get redesigned. So what mobility does is let us, start to take typical traditional kinds of formats and make them much more interactive, make them much more relevant. So that's why in Ogilvy, we have mobile technologists sitting in the creative department working with the creative directors. And if you don't bring marketing and engineering together, you can't really change the way that creativity is delivered. But that's really what our goal is. And I think that the change of the last 20 years has been fairly slow considering what has been possible. But what will happen as we go around the world, I mean, we see in China already that it's a little bit like the US 20 years ago. So yes, there's a huge amount of mobile and digital and e-commerce. We do all of that kind of work. We also make a lot of TV commercials, and they work. So, I don't know if that's the same thing that you see, Marcel. But
yeah, I was going to say 48% of all advertising in China by 2017 will be online. 47%.
That's fascinating.
But is on.
There's a huge amount of TV advertising.
Yeah, but is online. What is it? Is it video? And is digital video the same as TV advertising? It's getting closer and closer. So, I don't even know if the definitions and the distinctions make sense anymore.
Well, just going off of what he said earlier about this notion of content plus, what does that mean to you?
Well, it's things like, you know, he was talking about the second screen and companion content. Already, there are many major TV shows that are creating special content for the mobile device or the second device or the third device. And that has, you know, something that is either more interactive, something you can't do on typical television, or it has something that they're just not going to deliver on television, so it's different. And people are willing to go deep, you know, into content. You know, they don't just want to consume what everybody gets to see on the screen. And this is not new. The movies have been doing this for a long time, putting, you know, special content on DVDs or, you know, outtakes, whatever. So I think there's a lot of creativity that can be applied there, but that's the kind of thing that we'll see.
I think that's where the expanded business opportunity lies as well, right? Because when you think about, it's not just repurposing that primary screen content. That's where sort of the initial experiments weren't as compelling as they could have been. But it really is a companion or differentiated experience that offers that level of engagement. And then you see a lot of development, particularly in the last 2 years, around all the apps that go with that, which assist you in the content discovery and really help you find the way to engage with that, and then offer, as I think we heard a little bit before, different ways to reward you for that, whether it's content, whether it's a Vigil with loyalty programs attached to it. There are different ways to push that engagement and really come back to your comment around curation and communities and building that connected consumer.
I think the other question that was brought up was about mobile advertising, how we're going to actually, you know, get the advantage going for it. And I don't even think about mobile advertising. I think about mobile experiences. And we think creatively about creating apps, creating services that are delivered from marketers to their very mobile customers. So for British Airways, we're creating all kinds of special applications that their customer base is resolutely mobile already. They have to have something there that is a totally different experience and engagement exercise than making a high-level, single-minded message that might run on television. Not saying they won't still do that, but to really get consumer engagement, you just have to think, again, completely differently about it. And so I would think about services and apps rather than ads, because I don't think the small screen, we're ever going to see, you know, tremendously terrific, you know, ads.
But the consumer is also pretty savvy about when they're being marketed to, and the key is that sweet spot where you invite the message onto your phone.
Yeah, and the consumer doesn't hate marketing, by the way. You know, if they did, nobody would have been watching TV commercials all these years, and they like them. So, you know, I think it's all about what do you have permission to do? Don't insult the consumer. Don't, you know, overdo it, and be relevant and be valuable. And, you know, as far as I can see, again, there's device proliferation. There's multiple ways to consume more. So, you know, the consumer's not saying I want less. But they are saying, I want it to be good. And I think that's going to be the rub is we already have a lot of, you know, not great advertising online. We have a lot of, you know, not great advertising probably in every channel. But, you know, this is a demanding consumer, and they can easily turn you off. So.
Well, in the U.S. market, DVR penetration is at now about 50%. What happens when that gets to 60, 70, 80%?
I mean, it's everything that we've just been talking about. Just, you know, the tail, you know, the curve just goes up. But even with, you know, DVRs, there's still a way to engage with a consumer. There's still a way to get data working for you. I mean, that question about are advertisers going to and marketers willing to pay a premium for data? Well, yes, that's what the direct marketing business has been about for, you know, 50 years. If you can deliver a higher quality, more targeted customer, you should be able to charge a higher cost per thousand. And that's been done in list media for a long time. You just have to apply that sort of thinking across broader base.
And the trend with DVRs, I mean, that's just one more step, right, in the journey of mass media to my media, right? When I want to watch the content when I want to watch it. And if you look at the trends around VOD and how much consumers are willing to engage in content in that way, I mean, you talked about Netflix. That's a good example. It's blurring the lines between a television program and a movie. You can watch all the episodes at once. 13 hours of it at one time if you want. And so it's a journey, right, that we're allowing consumers to get the content when they want it and how they want it, and it's making it more valuable, and therefore the advertising that gets attached to it has more value.
What's an emerging market, just to shift gears a little bit, an emerging market that you think is sort of under appreciated right now?
You mean geographically?
Geographically.
Well, I mean, we sort of, for 15 years, have been looking at, because we're global, the BRICS, and then what we call, or what Goldman Sachs calls the Next 11, and then there's a couple new ones that you mentioned today, Kenya, who aren't officially in the Next 11, but these are all, we see really exciting things happening in these markets, and that's where all of our growth as an agency group is going to come from. So, we're not giving up in the U.S. because nice scale, but all those markets will drive, real creativity and with those new emerging middle classes, the ability to do different things. I mean, we just did in India, for instance, a Lifebuoy soap thing where we realized that we were trying to actually connect it to a social good, so getting people to wash hands more, reduce disease. So we went into this huge religious festival, and they stamped the Lifebuoy soap on the roti bread that everybody at that festival, hundreds of thousands of people, were going to be eating all day long. And it was, I mean, that's unusual media, but it was, and it
Bread
was,
media.
It was paid media. It cost something to do it, but it was immensely successful. So, I mean, I think everybody knows the list of countries where interesting stuff is going to happen. But it's just, we're going to go country by country. I mean, the great thing about it, a place like Asia or Africa, Asia, there's 50 countries, there's 16 major languages, but a whole group of other ones. How do you, if you think about the data world, how are you going to harness data in that environment? That's going to take real technology and automation and permission from the consumer. But it's a great opportunity. I mean, there's a million things you could do. And I think Africa is similar too. We see a lot of things with the payment system capability where people who never had the tether, as Marcel called it, we call them cord nevers. They're not cord cutters. They just never are going to have one. They're going to use that portable mobile device to run their lives. And again, we see that as opportunity and for creativity.
I think if I were to pick a country, an individual country, I'd pick probably Nigeria. The one that's shown up new in our research this year, and we've been hearing Bollywood for years. Now it's Nollywood. So I think we need to focus on, given the ad dollars flowing in there and the mobile story. But I'd probably answer that question a little bit differently as well. And I'd say, perhaps the story isn't as much about the 2 billion people that have internet access today, but the next 5 billion, they're going to get it. And that 2/3 of the population being middle class in the next 20 years. And how are we adapting as an industry to solve to that and to provide that unique customer targeted experience and really understand those customers at a granular level, not about the big data, about the small data and the overlaps of what they really want.
And will it take a professionally created mobile show or something that is uniquely mobile? We talked a little bit about the need for specific content created for mobile. Do you think there will be some kind of game changer, like an Avatar was for 3D or something like that, where it's a purely mobile show that is made for that device and is specifically going to, bring in new consumers and open up that market?
Well, I think we've already had that a couple of times. I mean, there's been mobile sports content for a long time, which is really powerful. There's been a couple of episodic series already created, at least for just online. And when you say just online now, it means every mobile device. So, and there isn't, just the super small screen, it's the tablet growth is probably just as important as the smartphone because you can actually have a higher quality consumption experience on that. But I mean, when you look at behavior again, so a Hollywood actor can come up with Vine to self-promote, does the 6-second thing, and now everybody is flipping back and forth their 6-second video. So I feel like and Snapchat and things like that, those show that there's an acceptance level, and again, as the population ages and the new classes around the world who kind of have that device from the time they become consumers, that opens up the chance to do content in any format that we could think of. We're just going to have to do a lot of tests, see which ones stick and which ones don't.
And I think the story too in mobile to really make it successful is around the content discovery process. How do you optimize a content discovery process in a mobile environment? Because you want a piece of content, you want to be able to find it. If you're challenged with that and challenged in finding it in a legitimate area and illegal consumption, then we have piracy, right? So I think it's really around the content discovery and making that easy for the consumer, and that will drive mobile to the next level.
So how do we do that?
Well, I want to add one other thing about mobile too as well, if that's okay. I mean, I think mobile's really interesting from a business model perspective because it's a great test bed for content. So we're seeing some very interesting, innovative things there where you can put content in a shorter form on a mobile device and really test it. If it does well, it goes viral, it gets a lot of users, then as a content creator that is a worthy bet for you. It's a far change from the model of waiting for all the pilots to, all the scripts and original ideas to come in. This is a very interesting way to test content and shortcut potentially that process, and it's very economically beneficial to a content creator to have a different outlet to test content.
I think the other part of, and this goes back to both curation and to what you've just been talking about, there's a whole wave of sensor technology that's now going to be integrated into all the devices. We've been working with Qualcomm, who are our client, but we actually work with their lab division as a partner to develop mobile apps for our other clients. And their whole technology is based on the ability to automatically sense personal preferences, demographics, location. And this is at the earliest stages. Now, I mean, people know about geofencing and those things, but eventually your device is going to could be wearable. I mean, we're already experimenting with wearable communications on behalf of a couple of big advertisers. So, as that technology, we started 18 months ago on this partnership. We're just now going out to clients with very specific in the hotel business, in the in the credit card business, and all these in the travel business. There's just a number of specific apps we'll go and try and test with them. But all you have to do is get 1 or 2 or 3 of these to catch on, and then
Google Glass.
Yeah, well, I mean that's another example. But these are the kinds of innovations that you have to be working on now. It might take 5 years for them to again get some critical mass, but that's okay.
And I think we come back to the issues around that's very exciting, right? It allows you to get the clutter out of your life, really, and get what you're very interested in. But as we heard earlier, it's really around protecting customers' privacy in that process as well, because they are concerned about that. So finding that balance between giving them the optimum content that's targeted and it's what they're looking for, while having them, opt into the process of providing all that information and letting you use it in the most creative ways.
Demographics and the sort of analytics of demographics are interesting to media now because if you're trying to market to a mass audience, if you are in the film business and you're trying to launch a worldwide blockbuster, the demographic information a lot of people in Hollywood think is not being used as much as it should be. You look at the NBC Universal just released this Fast and Furious movie, 30% of the audience for that movie is Hispanic. And if you talk to people at Universal Pictures, they say this is an audience that is not being marketed to, there's not these kinds of big budget films with multicultural casts, and there's really a disconnect. And how much in the media business are we not using demographic information smartly?
Well, I think probably a lot, because the tools have been kind of rough. But I just met a company through Andreessen Horowitz. We spent a day meeting the companies they've invested in. And one of them focuses entirely on this for the studios, mostly so far. They have a couple other clients. And they, I think it's called Quantifine, but I have to double check that. Again, startup, very new company. And they actually have a case history where they worked with the studio on the development of the script, because they brought the predictive analytics to the way the movie was going to be written and executed. And they said, your assumptions are wrong. And I have the data to prove it. So they changed the actual movie. They changed the content of, and it's a fantastic story. And
it worked?
Yeah, and it worked. And so now they've got clients at every studio. So that's all. All you got to do is go take that case out, and they're going to do very nicely. But then they'll go to financial services marketers and lots of other people to show that same capability. And the ability there is taking quite unstructured intent data from search and social uses, as well as structured data, and putting them together. So that's the big challenge of I hate the term big data now because it's so overused, but the challenge is putting those two things together, because you can do all the listening you want online, you can create feeds from all your social sites, but if you can't make that turn into information instead of just raw unstructured data, then it's not very valuable. And that's what this particular company is focused on. So I think we'll see a lot more of those.
I think what's really exciting about the trends we're seeing in digital and the opportunities it offers us is the ability to really much more closely understand and connect with the consumer and understand what they are watching. And so there's a feedback loop, a direct feedback loop that can exist through digital that hasn't been there before. So if you're looking at a television show that's very popular and you're looking at ratings on that, it can be not just the people that rate it, it could be people that watched it the whole time but didn't rate it, or the person that went for 20 minutes and then never came back. You don't really need a 0 rating to know that.
Yeah, Netflix says that. Even if you don't rate something, if you watch 8 hours of something, you pretty much liked it.
Yeah.
If you turned it off after 15 minutes, you didn't like it.
So how do you, when you look at the predictive analytics and the power of that, how do you look at that for one show, look at it for a different show, compare the demographics, and sort of create the magic in the middle, which is what is the shared dynamic of those customers? Did they like the type of storytelling? Did they like a particular actor? And then create the content that comes back and reaches into that community in a much more targeted way that attaches the advertising dollars to go with it. So those are just very exciting opportunities that we now have because we can track that level of engagement.
All right, we're going to open it up to a question or two if people have questions for either panelists. One here.
Carla, James Orsini, Single Touch Mobile Solutions. In your industry now, do you believe that these mobile solutions need to move out of the creative department and into the strategy or planning department? I mean, you talked about thinking of mobile as a service and not as an ad, and Marcel talked about, and Deborah as well, mobile moving from the mass media to my media. Yeah. I saw a case study with Hotwire.com, whose mobile app was just for booking hotels. It wasn't a replication of their website, and what they found was that the mobile user is not going to book an airplane or a car. Just when they're on the road, they want to get a quick and cheap hotel. So the app solution was just that simple, and they saw hotel bookings spike 23%. So it doesn't have to move out of the creative department into the planning and strategy department?
I mean, I can speak about the way we're structured, and we're fortunate to, for many years, have had not just an advertising agency approach. We've had digital and direct marketing capabilities. We've been in technology marketing for a long time. We have PR who really developed our social capability. And so what we've done is create something called Mobile at Ogilvy. It takes people from around the company who have to understand mobile from either creative, technology, media, analytic, all those points of view, and we put them into this offering, and that's how we actually go to market for to help clients. And there's one leader who, he's not a creative leader. He's somebody who understands mobile, and he's our global head. We have regional leaders and local leaders too. And the importance of that is, as you know, if you aren't doing mobile all day long, every day, you can't stay on top of it. We learned this from the search business, actually. I used to know a huge amount about search in 1997. I don't know anything about it anymore. We've bought companies. We have people who know every single aspect of it, because you can't keep up with the change unless you do it all the time. So that's why we have these sort of battlegrounds that we're focused on. Mobile is one of them, social is another, and that's what's happening in digital, is that it's becoming so many different things. But we do, at some level, go back to the creative organization. I mean, our hope always is that we're going to be both the most creative and the most effective with our work. And so we need engineers, we need technologists who understand mobility to be able to, and strategy, and insights about consumer behavior, to be able to round it all out. But ultimately, you do have to get some creative people in a room who can build something, who can make some stuff. And so I think that still goes back to, we value those people very much, and we hire that kind of talent. They're all coming out of school now, having been grown up with mobile devices, and they understand them better. So as the population ages, so does our creative department. And we hire many, many younger ones to help us there.
I would echo from the content side and from the distributor side as I look at our clients. 2 years ago we had digital divisions. You don't have those anymore. You don't have mobile divisions anymore. They're very much part of the mainstream content creation or distribution process, just another place to put the content.
But professional, like Hollywood-style content is still very much behind. There are big silos in terms of film, television, digital. It's merging a little bit, but you don't see that as much in the Hollywood-oriented content space.
Yeah, I actually think there's still a lot of clients who are marketers who are organized in the traditional methods, and that's because that's the way we account for things. So wherever follow the money, that's the way people are going to be organized. But every client we have is asking us for advice on how to reorganize. How should we get our marketing department set up now that digital is pervasive and mobile is pervasive? And so those are questions every company is, I think, going to be answering.
Yeah, I think, and 15 years ago, if you had said that the #1 show on television for 18 to 49 would be on a network called American Movie Classics and about zombies, nobody would have believed that. And
or ducks.
And with exactly Duck Dynasty. But and in our interview with Ted Sarandos, he was saying, the reason why we spent $100 million on House of Cards and hired David Fincher to direct it is because after David Fincher directs a show for the internet, no one is going to say, I don't want to direct a show for the internet. And I think that's what you're going to see from then on. But, other questions? One over here.
Hi, I'm Brie Rossetti from Arnold. Hi. We've talked a lot today about mobile, about digital, but one of the things that was interesting to me is earlier you were talking about exploiting sort of existing data models and how we're not doing that. You mentioned MSP specifically. We work a lot with them. One of the issues I have with that sort of aggregate data is that it's really robust when it comes to traditional models and those sort of algorithms, but how do we sort of get to a state where we can use that to determine the impact of mobile or digital or social within an overall holistic experience?
Well, I think you're sort of talking about how we're going to use PII or personal information on a sort of scale basis. And while I do think there are a lot of concerns about privacy and about security, I also observe that the younger you go in the population, the less they have those concerns for whatever stupid reason. Many of them, I guess, don't want to run for office, but because kids that grew up, people that grew up with Facebook and all of these social technology, they think that that's like electricity. It's just there. So they're not really trying to hide their personal data all that much. So I do think as both the population ages and emerges in some markets, you're not going to have the same issue of privacy as you might have in a country like Germany or even in the US, where it's hugely a big deal. But we're just, we're going to have to do what you always do with data and marketing, is use proxies and figure out what's allowed. The credit card business for years has not been allowed to really use a lot of personal identified information, but they can use personal information. I mean, if we couldn't, we wouldn't have been targeting offers the way that we have for years. So I just think there's going to be creativity around that, and we'll get to some good answers.
I think there's a lot of room to, even if I think about things like traditional set-top box data and how to access that and provide much more insight on a demographic and geographic basis than we're ever doing today. So even if you take the PII out of it, there's still much more precision that exists in that data, and I don't think we're tapping into that today in the way that we could. There's growth there.
One more question. There is one. In the back.
Mark Newcomer from Digitaria. There's been a lot of talk today about mobile and not as much focus, I think, today on interaction within TV and some of the other channels that you might want to interact with. Could you maybe comment on where that comes into play, and especially in the next 5 years?
Can you,
You're talking about
Yeah.
traditional TV or?
Well, we've got Xbox One coming out in the near future. You know, we had Google TV come out a couple years ago. We had Apple TV. We've got a really rich place where we have the second screen experience. We have a better first screen experience coming out, but we don't hear a lot of people talking about this is the place that might be the new area where we see apps being developed. So I'm curious, when do you see any play in the future or the near future for that to be the next kind of innovation spot?
I do think people are working on that a lot. You know, that each of those that you mentioned, there's a lot of innovation in work, but because the numbers are so concentrated on what we call traditional, you know, you may not hear about it as much. So you know, I think it's very significant. You know, doing things with all of those devices and those technologies is something everybody, you know, should be focused on. But I just don't know if we're going to get to a big enough scale. You know, I don't know if that's 5 years or 7 years or 10 years.
I think it comes back to the content discovery question too. You know, what is the easiest way for a consumer to find what they want to watch? And there are a number of apps out there, but there are many more that are being developed. And I think that's really sort of the secret sauce is finding a way to connect customers with that content that they're searching for and want to get to easily.
But it really goes back to what we talked about earlier, which is what is the difference between IP-delivered television experience and terrestrial television? I mean, for the consumer, there isn't going to be a difference. There already isn't. So, right. You know, they don't, if they're watching Apple TV on their TV set, great, but they might be also able to consume it on 10 other platforms. So, you know, I just think that we have to put ourselves in the shoes of the consumer, and of course we're all consumers too, as well as business people, and realize that those distinctions and definitions have to be recast.
Yeah, I think it's true, and I think the one part that's missing is that's the one channel that offers true convergence of a lot of these technologies coming. And you know, even though various players have missed in the past, I think the future has to be there because that's where the living room is still going to be a place where a lot of the really rich content is consumed.
Yeah.
I would echo that because when you look at the mobile usage and the second screen content, it's predominantly in the home. You know, it's predominantly sitting in front of the television, on your tablet, you know, or working with that alternative device. So it is occurring in that place.
I think the other place this is going to come into play is with e-commerce integration, you know, through the TV experience, which there's been lots of work done in the UK on that, and there's some good, you know, models for it, but it hasn't been sort of globally scaled. And I think people wanting to point their finger or, you know, touch a screen or do whatever to be able to buy what they see when they see it, that's going to be a big motivator for retailers and for other people to do that innovation work.
Okay. Thanks very much. This was
Thank
great.
you.
And I think we have some final comments. Deborah?
First of all, the comments that were made today across all the speakers and the outlook were remarkably consistent. One would have almost thought there was a rehearsal. There wasn't. I want to thank especially all the speakers today that are on the stage, certainly Mary, Carla, Matt, as well as Marcel and Sean and Andrew who's left. And a special thank you to Hollywood Reporter. You'll all see this on your table. This is one of the first coverages of the Outlook, and on page 38 there's a multiple page spread. You can take those with you and enjoy that as a souvenir of your day. You know, one thing I'm taking away from this is that we are all living in the midst of incredible change from every topic that we talked about today around mobile, around measurement, around privacy and regulation. And I would suggest to you that that pace of change will continue to accelerate through the rest of our careers and probably for the rest of the careers of the people who are working with you and for you. So to borrow from the Outlook and from Carla Hendra, continuous innovation and redesign of your customer experience is what's going to be required. So with that said, thank you all very much for coming and joining us this year.